Hollywood's golden age looked like glitter and Oscar gold. But behind the cameras, stars secretly hated each other so much they traded punches, plotted sabotage, and even turned the 1942 Academy Awards into a family war. One feud lasted 70 years, another ended in death, and the last entry? It's the most shocking Hollywood betrayal ever exposed.
You've always been jealous of me. You've been jealous of my career, of the kind of life that I lead. You're even jealous.
Let's start with number 10. Clara Bow versus Gloria Swanson. Paramount had two queens, but only one spotlight. Clara Bow, the flapper who electrified audiences, and Gloria Swanson, Hollywood's regal grande dame. Bow's it grossed over $1 million, cementing her as America's it girl. At the same time, Swanson commanded $8,000 a week and traveled with trunks of Paris couture. How could two such different stars possibly coexist without clashing? Swanson reportedly dismissed Bow as unrefined. Isn't it striking that the woman born in Brooklyn tenements who clawed her way into fame faced snobbery from someone crowned by old Hollywood? Letters show Bow confessed Swanson's scorn cut deeper than critics. But why did studios allow such tensions to fester instead of protecting their stars? The truth is, contrast sold tickets. Bow embodied the wild youth of the jazz age, slang, laughter, and speakeasy spirit. Swanson embodied aristocratic control, a carefully manicured image of sophistication. Doesn't it feel as though Paramount was gambling that rivalry itself could fuel fascination? Anecdotes confirm it. At a Paramount gala, Swanson turned her back during Bow's introduction, leaving witnesses stunned. What happens to a star's confidence when her own studio peers treat her as lesser? Bow never forgot it. Swanson thrived long enough to star in Sunset Boulevard, while Bow's decline was sharp and lonely. Few fans knew, Bow later wrote, that Swanson's rejection haunted her more than any bad review. Isn't it haunting that rejection, not obscurity, left the deepest scar? Let's move on to number 9, Marilyn Monroe versus Jane Russell. Fox Publicity called them the perfect pair in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, yet behind the glittering facade, tensions simmered. Studio records reveal Monroe's delays cost production roughly $25,000, today worth nearly $270,000. Russell, a seasoned professional since The Outlaw, arrived early, ready for her close-ups. But Monroe often stayed locked in her trailer, paralyzed by stage fright and dependent on her acting coach Natasha Lightus.
She did look to her coach a lot, and she worked with her coach after the full-day shooting.
How long could Russell's patience hold? Crew members remembered Russell cracking jokes to keep extras entertained while everyone waited. Doesn't it fascinate you that patience, not performance, became her greatest role? And yet in interviews, Russell always shielded Monroe, calling her sensitive.
And she was very sensitive, super sensitive.
Why defend someone who tested every nerve? Perhaps Russell recognized that Monroe's fragility was part of her stardom. The interruptions didn't stop at lateness. Lightus sometimes stepped into scenes, critiquing Monroe mid-take, infuriating Russell, who prided herself on discipline. Can you imagine another star tolerating this? Still, the result was undeniable. The film grossed $5.3 million domestically, launching Monroe into superstardom. Isn't it ironic that Monroe's chaos helped create the legend, while Russell's discipline kept the film alive? Years later, Russell admitted she was paid more for patience than for acting. Isn't it curious that audiences celebrated Monroe's brilliance, but never realized it was Russell's tolerance holding everything together? Now moving on to number 8, Ava Gardner versus Lana Turner. The contrast between two women, one studio, and countless comparisons. MGM built Ava Gardner and Lana Turner into rivals as much as stars. By the mid-1940s, Turner reigned as the famed Sweater Girl, a nickname born from a tight top she wore in They Won't Forget that sparked a nationwide craze. Gardner, signed in 1941, rose quickly, her sultry screen presence electrifying audiences and intimidating co-stars. When both circled the same roles, who could possibly emerge unscathed? Gossip columnists like Hedda Hopper thrived on their rivalry. She reported Turner once scoffed that Gardner was a storm cloud waiting to burst. Isn't it fascinating how a single sentence in a gossip sheet could alter reputations overnight? Gardner fired back in private, calling Turner too porcelain to breathe. How strange is it that two women smiling together in studio photographs were sharpening their knives behind the scenes? Their personal lives made the feud irresistible. Turner's scandalous affair with mob-connected Johnny Stompanato ended in his 1958 stabbing by her teenage daughter, a trial that dominated headlines. Gardner's tempestuous romance with Frank Sinatra nearly ended his career in 1953, when MGM suspended him over their affair. Could any studio have resisted pitting such scandal magnets against each other? Life magazine quoted an MGM executive admitting the rivalry sold more headlines than our Technicolor pictures. Isn't it astonishing that a studio banked on animosity as much as artistry? Ultimately, Turner and Gardner defined MGM's golden years not only through beauty and talent, but through a rivalry so carefully cultivated it became legend. Doesn't that make you wonder how many classic feuds were really studio inventions? At number 7, Errol Flynn versus David Niven. There once was a bachelor life shared by Errol Flynn and David Niven at the Garden of Allah Hotel in Hollywood, which attracted Hollywood stars in the late 1930s. Flynn was the wild card, famous for Captain Blood and the adventures of Robin Hood. Niven, Oxford-educated and polished, was already a favorite for his wit. But how long could elegance tolerate chaos? Flynn's reputation wasn't exaggerated. He drank heavily, crashed cars, and courted scandal. Isn't it striking that while Flynn's films made millions worldwide, his off-screen antics threatened to undo everything? In 1942, scandal exploded when Flynn was tried for statutory rape, a trial so sensational that crowds lined up daily outside the courthouse. What did his closest friends do? Some, like Niven, quietly distanced themselves. Doesn't that silence reveal as much as testimony ever could? Niven admitted later, in his memoir, Bring on the Empty Horses, that Flynn was writing his own epitaph daily. Could admiration and disgust really coexist in friendship? Flynn spiraled, filing for bankruptcy in 1953, despite once being among Warner Brothers' highest-paid stars. Meanwhile, Niven climbed steadily, winning an Oscar in 1959 for Separate Tables. Even near the end, Flynn confided he felt betrayed by friends who abandoned him. Isn't it haunting to think that fame's brightest knight died at just 50, while his once close companion thrived into old age? Next up, number 6, Fred Astaire versus Gene Kelly. Two men never declared open war, yet every step they danced was a silent duel. Fred Astaire, who first dazzled audiences in Top Hat, embodied effortless elegance. Gene Kelly, bursting onto the scene in CoverGirl and immortalized in Singin' in the Rain, radiated raw athleticism. Was Hollywood big enough for two dance kings? Astaire's box office dominance of the 1930s made him untouchable, but Kelly's post-war style felt modern, masculine, and uniquely American. Isn't it fascinating how audiences themselves seem to divide loyalties by generation? MGM's own publicity leaned into the rivalry, labeling Kelly the new heir to Astaire's throne. But how did the men really feel? Private letters reveal Astaire admitted he rehearsed harder whenever Kelly released a film. Doesn't that sound like rivalry channeled into discipline rather than sabotage? Kelly once quipped privately, "Fred is refinement, I am sweat." Doesn't that paradox perfectly capture their dual reign? critics split too. Astaire's grace versus Kelly's power. In 1952, the New York Times boldly declared Kelly the dancer for America's new century. Imagine how Astaire felt reading that, after decades of pioneering the art form. By the 1950s, their careers overlapped in prestige, but diverged in style. Isn't it remarkable that two men could dominate the same genre by embodying opposite ideals? Astaire even admitted he feared history might forget him beside Kelly, proof that even legends feared being overshadowed. Doesn't that confession make their rivalry feel almost human? Here is number 5. Lupe Vélez versus Dolores Del Rio. Few rivalries cut as deep as the one between Lupe Vélez and Dolores Del Rio, both Mexican-born stars who entered Hollywood yet embodied complete opposites. Del Rio, elegant and serene, became the first major Latina leading lady, dazzling audiences in Flying Down to Rio and hailed as the most beautiful woman in Hollywood. Vélez, fiery and unpredictable, conquered audiences a decade later with her Mexican Spitfire comedies of the 1940s. What happens when elegance and volatility are forced to share the same cultural spotlight? Vélez's mockery was infamous. At one party, she loudly imitated Del Rio's refined Spanish accent, then sneered that her rival was a bird of ill omen. Isn't it startling that words shouted in a crowded ballroom linger in biographies nearly a century later? But why such animosity? Some historians argue Vélez resented Del Rio's carefully polished European image, seeing it as a betrayal of authentic Mexican identity. Doesn't that reveal how culture itself became their battlefield? The Mexican press amplified the feud, painting them as living archetypes. Del Rio, the aloof aristocrat, Vélez, the tempestuous firebrand. Isn't it ironic that Hollywood rarely supported more than one Latina star at a time, sharpening personal slights into career warfare? Behind the gossip lies tragedy. Vélez's shocking suicide in 1944 at age 36 devastated her admirers. When asked later, Del Rio refused to even say her rival's name, commenting only that silence was kinder than memory. Doesn't that refusal suggest wounds too deep and perhaps too personal to ever heal? Next up is number 4, Greta Garbo versus Marlene Dietrich. Two of cinema's most enigmatic stars, Greta Garbo and Marlene Dietrich, always insisted they never knew each other.
Did you know her?
No. No, I did not.
You did meet her?
No.
Yet historians uncovered evidence that both moved in the same Berlin cabaret circles of the 1920s, when the city pulsed with jazz, expressionist art, and sexual freedom. If they truly crossed paths, why deny it so completely? Garbo, the Swedish Sphinx, captivated audiences with her aloof mystery in films like Camille. Dietrich, launched to stardom in Morocco, exuded bold sensuality and open defiance of gender norms. Isn't it remarkable how Hollywood sold them as polar opposites while their careers mirrored each other's rise? Whispers persisted that the women may have shared a brief affair in Berlin before Hollywood fame. Could that explain why Dietrich later mocked Garbo's Swedish silences, while Garbo refused to utter Dietrich's name at all? Doesn't such avoidance sound like rivalry transformed into disdain?
Your competitors?
No. Nobody was ever a competitor.
Is that
Not
true?
with Garbo, no.
Or perhaps secrecy, shielding something deeper? Casting records show Paramount once considered Dietrich as a backup choice for Garbo's Mata Hari. Can you imagine the fury if the studios had replaced one legend with another? In archives, researchers found a letter where Dietrich flatly denied ever meeting Garbo, despite photographs placing them at the same Berlin soirees. Isn't contradiction itself the loudest clue of all? By maintaining silence, both stars fueled their myths. And here lies the irony. Whether their rivalry was real, imagined, or born of erased intimacy, it amplified their aura as untouchable goddesses of cinema. Doesn't mystery itself make their story unforgettable? Let's continue with number 3. Miriam Hopkins versus Bette Davis. On screen, they delivered fireworks. Off screen, the sparks were real.
You've always been jealous of me. You've been jealous of my career, of the kind of life that I lead. You're even jealous.
Miriam Hopkins, acclaimed for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, was already a respected leading lady when Bette Davis rose at Warner Brothers, storming to fame with Jezebel. But what happens when professional jealousy collides with personal betrayal? Hopkins believed Davis had stolen her husband, director Anatole Litvak. Isn't it astonishing how Hollywood marriages turned into weapons on set? The feud deepened when Davis won the Best Actress Oscar for Jezebel, a role Hopkins desperately wanted. Can you imagine watching another actress win the prize you considered yours? By the time they filmed Old Acquaintance, resentment boiled over. Crew members whispered that their scenes threatened to erupt into real fights. In one unforgettable moment, Davis's character shakes Hopkins violently. Insiders insist Davis enjoyed it more than acting required. Doesn't it give you chills to think audiences witnessed real hatred disguised as performance? Davis never hid her contempt. Years later, she admitted flatly, "I hated Miriam Hopkins." Isn't it rare for a Hollywood star to confirm what gossip columnists had screamed for years? Hopkins, equally defiant, carried the bitterness for decades, filling diary entries with barbed words about Davis. Why cling to a rivalry so long after the spotlight dimmed? Here's the irony. Warner Brothers knew about the animosity and marketed it. Posters and press kits hinted at the tension between the two women. Isn't it unsettling that a studio turned genuine loathing into box office appeal, selling audiences pain as entertainment? Now we'll look at number 2, Olivia de Havilland versus Joan Fontaine's sisters by blood, enemies by choice. Olivia de Havilland and Joan Fontaine's feud lasted nearly a century. Olivia became a household name after Gone with the Wind, while Fontaine stunned critics in Hitchcock's Rebecca. But what happens when success in Hollywood isn't shared, but stolen? The breaking point came at the 1942 Academy Awards. Both sisters were nominated for Best Actress, Olivia for Hold Back the Dawn, Joan for Suspicion. Fontaine's victory shocked the audience. As she walked to the stage, Olivia extended no congratulations. Doesn't it feel surreal that a single golden statue could ignite a war that lasted for generations? Fontaine later said, "Olivia never forgot a slight, real or imagined. Was this bitterness born on Oscar night, or did childhood rivalry spill onto the world's biggest stage?" Their mother reportedly favored Olivia, leaving Fontaine fighting for scraps of affection. Could that old wound explain why Hollywood recognition deepened the divide? The feud became legendary. At premieres, they ignored one another. At family gatherings, relatives remembered silence, heavier than dialogue. Even when Fontaine died in 2013, Olivia, then 97 years old, offered no reconciliation. Doesn't it send chills that 7 decades of shared fame never softened their hearts? Historians argue that rivalry fueled their craft. Olivia's fierce independence helped her win landmark legal battles against Warner Brothers in 1943, reshaping Hollywood contracts. Fontaine's determination earned her a rare Hitchcockian legacy. Yet both chose victory over sisterhood. Isn't it tragic that two women who conquered Hollywood couldn't conquer their own resentment? And finally, at number 1, Bette Davis versus Joan Crawford. Hollywood's most infamous feud wasn't hidden. It was headline news. Bette Davis, Warner Brothers' powerhouse, and Joan Crawford, MGM's glamour queen, despised each other for decades. But why did this animosity endure longer than most careers? The first spark came in the 1930s when both pursued actor Franchot Tone. Crawford married him. Davis admitted she never forgave her. Doesn't it fascinate you how a personal rivalry ignited an industry legend? on whatever happened to baby Jane. Their hatred became legend. Davis allegedly kicked Crawford during a scene. Crawford retaliated by sewing weights into her costume so Davis would strain lifting her. Doesn't that sound more like war than work? Oscar Knight brought another sting. Davis expected to win for baby Jane. Instead, Crawford arranged to accept Anne Bancroft's award, striding onto the stage as Davis sat furious. Isn't it astonishing how personal spite overshadowed career triumphs? Even decades later, Davis declared, "I never forgave her." Crawford, equally relentless, left no apology. Their feud outlived them both, still retold as Hollywood's greatest grudge. Isn't it telling that two women, once stars of the screen, achieved immortality not only through film, but through fury? Hollywood hides darker secrets than anyone admits. The next video uncovers rivalries even wilder than these. Click now, because the truth you'll see next will completely change movie history.